Hi, my name is Andrew Newman. I am a veteran of the data space. I've spent the last 20 years advising companies on how to get value out of their data. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the, the best practices and how to do that. And I'm going to use a fun example from my personal life, eating my own dog food, as it were, showing how I use these frameworks to become a better poker player, become a poker player from scratch, in fact, these last several weeks. So hopefully it'll be a little more fun than talking about the usual stuff. And then without further ado, here we go. So here's the summary. The too long didn't read, if you will. There's a lot of great talk about AI at the moment, and most companies are doing something in that space. Um, but if you actually look at where companies are spending their money on data, it's around infrastructure and the reporting that sorts that. It's really bread and butter stuff for the most part. And too many focus on cleaning up the numbers they have, things that they've been tracking forever without actually even thinking about why, and not necessarily what they actually need to do to support good business decisions. So as a result, this leads to organizations that are data rich, but in fact information poor when it comes to decision making. And the framework I'm going to present today helps organizations surface the right data and also present it in the right way to make better decisions at the right level in the organization. And potentially, it will make you a better poker player. So here's the current state of play. And there's a fundamental conflict between, or a disconnect, if you will, between data strategy and business strategy. Data is what I would call a brownfield operation in most large organizations. It's something that's grown organically. There are very few big companies that don't have enough data or don't have data. There's lots and lots of it, but not all of it's good. So the usual challenges around architecture, governance, quality, latency, all those things that companies are spending a lot of money cleaning up. But more to the point of today's presentation, the data they have is just stuff that they've always had and stuff that they continue to churn out without thinking about it. Um, and it's often misaligned to the actual business goals. Like no one's really taking a step back to decide to look at it and decide whether or not it's appropriate for the decision they need to make to discover whether or not they're winning or losing and what they need to do about it. So that's what we're going to try to work past today, if you will. Here's how it should work in theory. You start with the business strategy. Data strategy should fundamentally be in the service of that. So you define business success. What does good look like? What does winning look like? You choose the tactics to support that strategy. Now, these are not data things at all. These are just standard, corporate strategy, management consultant stuff that every organization should have nailed down. Once you've done those two things, you identify the right KPIs to track those to understand whether or not it's working. You figure out how to operationalize those KPIs with the right instrumentation, the right tagging of your business. This is where the data stuff happens. And finally, you make that information accessible to not just your specialists, but to general business users who need to make decisions off of data. That's how you fundamentally make an organization data-driven, to use a cliche. Now, this seems fairly obvious, perhaps, to some of us, but nonetheless, very few companies do this particularly well. And again, I'm not going to get into a specific client of mine that has done this or tried to do this or failed to do this. Instead, I'm going to give you an example of how I've eaten my own dog food very recently, because I frankly thought it would be more fun. So okay, like that's a framework, blah blah blah, PowerPoint slides. We've seen and done that many times. Okay, but here's a case study for you. So this year, for fun, I decided to set a goal for myself to learn how to play poker, and more to the point, to learn how to play poker gainfully for money. Now, bear in mind, I'm not a gambling man. I've never set foot in a casino when I started this process. I didn't even own a deck of cards. I had to go down to the corner off license to buy one because I thought I should own one as part of this process. But I did know, like at a high level, about poker, that it requires a knowledge of statistics, game theory, psychology, observation, and really all of these things are to some extent quantifiable. So to quote the illustrious data strategist Matt Damon from the film The Martian, I was going to have to science the shit out of this. So back to my framework, defining the business goals. So this is where I started. Me as a business, poker as the business, if you'll allow that poetic license. I spent about a month studying the game before I even played a single hand. Call this your market research, call this your strategic assessment. Whatever you do just to understand what the playing field is. It turns out that poker is not just a game. There are lots of variants on it. The most popular ones are No Limit Texas Hold'em, Hot Limit Omaha, and Seven Card Stud. Poker is played offline in casinos, as we know, as we've seen in movies, et cetera, et cetera. But increasingly, it's also played online, and the games are very, very different. So more to that in a minute. And finally, there are cash games where you sit down at the table and you come and go as you please. And then there are organized tournaments where there's a buy-in, and then a certain number of people, at the top of the results will make money off of it. And so my goal is to consistently make money, and ideally at scale. I don't want to just like be a good player in terms of like non-monetary results. Like poker's fundamentally intrinsically linked to gambling, and therefore the success wasn't going to be the number of hands I won, but how much money I make actually doing it. That was the decision that I made. So those are my business. That's my business success. And then the next stage is choosing the tactics to support that strategy. And I broke this into three areas. First, what to play, where to play, then where to play, and then what format to play. So what to play? There, as I said, there's various forms of poker being played today. Texas Hold'em is by far the most popular variant. So to me, that was the obvious starting point. I didn't want to be a niche player and be sort of scraping around for people to play against because I was the best seven card stud player in the area, even though no one else was playing that game. I wanted a little bit of like market liquidity, if you will. And I was going to start playing with the lowest stakes available, and just to learn and make my learning investment as small as possible, and then move up progressively as my earnings were consistent at each individual level. Where to play? So I started out playing online very deliberately. This is like a perfect place to learn because the stakes are really low. You're talking there are about 1 cent, 2 cent games available where that's the minimum wager. But the competition is really fierce. There are guys who do this for a living, playing 8, 12 hands simultaneously with the help of software. Typically from low-cost locations in Eastern Europe and South America, where they're using this to sort of grind out a living, making $20 an hour, which they can live off of if they do this 8, 12 hours a day. So you're playing against people who've logged literally millions of hands. And so my thought was that if I lose against those guys, I will learn very quickly without losing a lot of money. And if I can beat them, I will be able to take that knowledge and that skill set offline, and then play games that are theoretically easier, like against recreational players, Friday, Saturday nights, West End casinos, where the stakes are the stakes are much higher, even for like the minimum wager. So that's the strategy: what to play, where to play, and then what format to play. If you do the research online, there's a lot of publicity around tournaments. They're fun, they're spectator friendly to some extent, and I think casinos like them for business reasons. The reality is, you buy into a tournament, even if it's just a small local thing. Typically, only about 25% of the participants make money, and those people are very rarely novices. So my view was to start with cash games, give myself access to casual players who haven't necessarily studied the game the same way I have. They'll offer lower earnings than like a tournament payout, but it should be more consistent, and it should get me to a point where I'm returning a profit more quickly than I would otherwise. Now I may tweak that strategy later on as I get more experience, but these are my tactics to start. Okay, so notice I've gone through defining business success and choosing the tactics to support that strategy. 2 of my 5 stages. I still haven't talked about data. Why? Because as I said, business strategy comes first. Business strategy then informs the data that you need to have to support that and to evaluate that strategy and its success. So getting into stage three, that's where it starts to happen. Poker is a data-driven game, second perhaps only to baseball in that regard. Uh, Online poker is a data hound's dream come true because it's easy to track. Like everything that happens on there is basically possible to log. And there are third-party software that you can invest in that gives you access to dozens of variables on your hand, on what your opponents are doing. And some basic analysis around that is available as well. And I found that to be useful and a good learning tool. However, it doesn't really translate to offline play. I can't sit down at a table in a casino and get like a heads up display on everything that's happening around me in sort of minority report fashion. And I wanted a unified view that would cover not just the online game, but everything I'm playing. And also good data strategies about reduction. So I didn't want just to inform myself, but I wanted to talk to the broader stakeholders in my poker success, if you'll pardon the poetic license on this one. Focus on what will inform the C-suite and save the rest of the analysis for in the weeds specialists. So I will look at those dozens of variables after I've played a session of poker to see what worked and what didn't, and how I'm improving. But fundamentally, the C-suite in my house boils down to my partner, who wants to know that I'm not risking the mortgage on this new hobby of mine, and we won't have the car repossessed because I'm having a little too much fun playing poker. So I needed to have numbers to support that, and I needed to have them in a format that would be accessible and readily digestible to her. So the functional equivalent of that in the business world is, dealing with your CMO or your head of HR, your head of operations, whatever it may be, people who need data to make their decisions, but aren't steeped in on a day-to-day basis. It's one of many, many things they have to do well. You need to support those people, and if you're not doing your job well as a data strategist, as far as I'm concerned. And then how do you operationalize those KPIs, and like how do you actually like instrument the business to make sure that you're tracking those things? So I narrowed this down to just really two variables I need to report up to my C-suite. And there'll be a bit of debate about this, that I'm oversimplifying and what have you. But fundamentally, I think it boils down to hourly earnings and then your cumulative winnings and losses. And there are a bunch of dimensions you use to sort of, to derive color and nuance from those and to slice and dice it different ways. But fundamentally, those are the two variables I care about. Hourly earnings give me a sense of the variance over time very quickly, just by looking at how they go up and down. It also gives me a sense of the order of magnitude of the return on investment. If I'm spending an hour at a table online versus offline, they should be quite different. And the cumulative winnings and losses should be a fairly obvious point, but you can have a bad streak over a period of time and put money into it and lose track of it over time and have it get away from you. So I wanted to be able to know that over various time periods. I'm not going to talk about how to actually play poker in this discussion, but let's assume that I've done my research and I've got a decent handle on it. I will get better at it over time, obviously, hopefully. But let's say that I've worked out the playbook to do this consistently and hopefully win more often than I lose. There will be some natural variance. So luck does play a role in this, but that should average out over the long run. In terms of like what differentiates winning from losing, as I've defined it, it ultimately boils down to who you play against. And this again ties back to a lot of problems I see in the business world. There's a lot of things where if you sit down with the data team, they'll say, oh yes, we'd love to know that, but we don't have the information to support that. There's no way of knowing X. And I don't know the skill of the people who I'm playing against. When I sit down at a table, I don't know anything about them. If I'm playing online, I don't even know their real names, frankly. But there are proxies you can use to make inferences and to back that out of the data you have available. And those, to my view, are the venue, like where you're playing, what the stakes are. Lower stakes, by and large, are going to have lower skilled players. more novices, and fewer experienced players. Time of day that you play. Like if you walk into a casino at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, unless you're in a resort town, you're going to get pros. You're going to be swimming with sharks when you go in there. However, if you go in on a Friday or Saturday night, you're going to get people who are there to have a good time, and they may or may not be well studied in the game. Day of week, same thing. The game structure, again, this gets back to cash versus tournaments. As I said, I think tournaments fundamentally favor more skilled players if you're there to make money. And there are many, many others, but these are the priorities, and these are the priorities identified that are measurable. So these, in fact, became the dimensions in my data schema, effectively. So at this point, we've gone from defining business success at a very high level, figuring out how we're going to pursue that success with very specific approaches. What are the ways of measuring that? And then how we double click on those measurements and find ways that we can actually log and track them in a way that they can be aggregated into a meaningful stat. So this is what it looks like. This is my database. So finally, let's talk data. So it's just a simple data structure I set up to log all activity. This is a flat file in Excel. Right now, it's small enough that I can do that. And you see both logged and derived calculated fields. So the ones in white are just things I've logged. I've input those as I'm doing sessions of poker. And the gray ones are derived from those. So like I'm not manually typing in Saturday. Like if I type in 27th of January, the system knows that that was a Saturday because I have the formula that does that. I log my start and my stop time, and from that it will determine how many hours I played. And from there, once I have my winnings logged, it will tell me what my hourly rate is. Fairly simple. And again, like I have more detailed stats that I can look at for individual sessions. But the purpose of this particular data exercise is to answer the big strategic question of am I winning, and to do so in a way that I can communicate that beyond the data team. So here was my starting point on this. And I am a data geek. As I said, I've been doing this for 20 years. Any analyst will tell you that a good pivot table will solve the world's problems. And I fundamentally agree with that. However, if your data isn't immediately understandable and available for that matter to the real decision makers, it's not really enough. So my partner's not going to look at a pivot table. I don't think she even has Excel in her system. If she does, like this is a format that would leave her very, very cold, and she just sort of glaze over and tune out. So good data visualization is really not just like the cherry on top. It's pivotal to proving that your business and your data strategies are aligned. If you cannot take the data and put it into a format that people understand it immediately, in such that they're bought into the numbers, they understand what they mean, and they're able to make a decision off of what they're seeing in those numbers. If you can't do that, then you've failed. You're building shelfware, and it can be the cleverest stuff in the world. You can have the cleanest data pipeline, and it just doesn't matter if you're not bubbling it up in a way that it is consumable. So that's where data visualization comes into play. So I took that data and I dumped it into Tableau. And here's what it looks like. So again, just two variables. The blue bars here are representing my average hourly rate. You see like there's a bit of big swings early on as I was starting to learn, and it sort of coalesced into a range and then has gone steadily up. The green line represents my cumulative earnings. And again, these are very, very small numbers because I'm still playing micro stakes, one table at a time online. When I take this offline, I imagine the scale will get quite different. And I will perhaps even have to separate out the online from the offline channels into separate views, so one doesn't swamp the other in the analysis. But again, so this is a month of data here. Like if I if I bring it back down to a week, like it starts to look a little bit better. You see sort of my trend going up in terms of my average hourly wages, although I'm still in the hole. If I take it out to just like the full range of data, you get to see the whole picture. I can just sort of click through here and show you what my results look like. I did a couple of lightning fast tournaments actually, which padded my earnings. So if I bring those out, like my numbers don't look quite as good, particularly in my cumulative earnings. And then I can play around with the stakes and stuff as well. Like I have only been playing one kind of poker at the moment. As I said, I'm only a few weeks into this. But as the data accumulates, there will be more flexibility to this analysis. And the point is they're just clicking on the various things here to decide what they want to look at, and they can see what's happening. Now I may add some reports to this over time, but by and large, these are the numbers that we need to see. And so that's the story there. So some final thoughts, very briefly. Don't just do data because as a self-perpetuating means to an end. Work out what the business strategy is first. Work out what decisions you need to support, and figure out how to support that with the right data, even if it's not obvious, even if that data is not immediately accessible. Figure out a way to represent it. And focus on what you need to know, what the business needs to know, not what you happen to have lying around the house. And then finally, data is for everyone. It's not just for the wonks that sit in the basement and crunch the numbers out. It's for non-data people to make decisions. And if you're not making that happen through the right data visualization, then you've failed to some extent. I mean, that's how you make an organization data-driven, is by making the data available to everyone and make sure that everyone is bought into it because it supports the decisions they want to make. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. As I said, my name is Andrew Newman. And there's my contact information. It's andrew@firmpark.co.uk. You can also find me on Twitter at Andrew S. Newman. And if you're not on either of those formats, just, I don't know, take a note, wrap it around a brick and throw it through my window. That usually gets my attention fairly quickly. But I hope you liked what you saw, and feel free to drop me some comments as and when you see fit. Thank you very much.